Chapter 91, The Strange Meteoric Iron. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Brother Zhao, if you want to share something, please feel free to say it. Shi Mu wrinkled his brows as he spoke. I've already told you that this blade is impeccable, as far as the degree of sharpness or the quality of material is concerned. But, you must be thinking that why this blade is so heavy, right? In fact, this blade is so heavy that even a martial warrior with gifted innate strength can't wield it, Zhao Ping said. Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he heard these words. He didn't say anything. However, a question bubbled up in his mind. The blade art wasn't famous for its agility and elegancy like sword art, it relied on swift movements and variations. So, an extremely heavy blade was more of a disadvantage rather than an advantage to an ordinary warrior who couldn't wield it with agility. There were only a few mighty warriors like Shi Mu who were born with an extraordinary strength. These warriors could further enhance their strength with the help of charm magic. I was ecstatic to discover this chunk of meteoric iron. So, I exerted painstaking efforts to forge it into a blade. But, there is something that I haven't mentioned as yet. I'm afraid Brother Shi won't believe me. When this weapon was forged, it weighed only 50 kilograms or a little more. Zhao Ping smiled bitterly as he said. Only 50 kilograms. Shi Mu was astonished. When I had forged this blade, I didn't have any plans to sell it right away. But, a strange thing happened. The weight of this blade continued to rise. In a span of 1 month, its weight was almost twice as much as its original weight. By the end of the second month, its weight had increased by 50 kilograms, Zhao Ping sighed as he explained. Did this strange thing really occur? Shi Mu asked. He couldn't believe this story. It's hard to believe. But, this is an absolute truth. Since then, it has been constantly gaining weight but at a slower rate. It weighs 250 kilograms as of now. It's expected to become heavier in the future. No one can wield this weapon since it has become so heavy. So, it's lying in the shop, unwanted, Zhao Ping said with a bitter smile. This is bewildering. The reason behind its increasing weight must be the quality of its material, the meteoric iron, Shi Mu said. It was unprecedented for a blade to get heavier without any reason. But, the story didn't seem to be a lie as far as Zhao Ping's expressions were concerned. I also think so. I asked a few experts to examine this blade. But, nobody could recognize this material. If Brother Shi doesn't mind the fact that this blade might get even heavier than now, then I'd like you to have it. But, the price would be exorbitant. Still, I'll be glad to sell this blade, Zhao Ping said with a sigh. Well, this blade is so mysterious that I really wish to have it. May I ask the price? Shi pondered for a while. Then, he asked without any hesitation. He had a feeling that his physical strength would rise with his progress in the art of breeding heavenly elephants. Therefore, he was least concerned about the blade's growing weight. Zhao Ping hesitated for a moment. Then, he raised 5 fingers. 50,000 silvers. Shi Mu's brows wrinkled as he asked. It's 500,000 silvers. Shi Mu's face became pale as he heard the figure. Brother Shi, I'm not demanding an exorbitant price. I've already told you that I spent innumerable precious materials to forge this blade. I even used some precious stones and stuff that are used only for magic weapons. This 500,000 silvers will barely cover the cost. Zhao Ping noticed the change in Shi Mu's complexion. So, he added a few more words of explanation. However, his words failed to soothe Shi Mu's knitted brows. Shi Mu had only 400,000 silvers or so, even if he added up all his money. Perhaps, he must take up some task to cover up the shortage of 100,000 silvers since it wasn't a negligible sum of money. This black blade had satisfied him in every respect. However, it was illogical to spend all his money to purchase this weapon. How about this? You can pay 60% of the amount if you don't have sufficient funds. As for the remaining amount, you must make some magic charms for me. Then, it'll be counterbalanced. What say? Zhao Ping noticed Shi Mu's hesitation. Suddenly, he thought of an idea. Then, he came up with the suggestion. Well, this idea is good. But, I'd like to know what kind of magic charms Brother Zhao wants me to make. Shi Mu's eyes sparkled as he nodded. Brother Shi, just wait a moment. Zhao Ping's face beamed with happiness. He hurriedly turned around and went back into the inner room. He returned with a piece of white paper, and handed it over to Shi Mu. Well, it's settled then. Shi Mu threw a cursory glance at the content and nodded in agreement. Brother Shi, please feel relieved. I'll send someone to deliver the materials to make these charms. Zhao Ping felt exhilarated as he saw that everything had gone smoothly. Shi Mu nodded. Then, he took out 300,000 silver notes from his shirt and gave them to Zhao Ping. Oh! By the way, Brother Zhao, you mentioned that you used some magic material to forge this blade. So, I wonder if I can inscribe some magic characters on it to turn into a genuine magic weapon, Shi Mu thought for a while and then asked. Shi Mu didn't know much about magic weapons. However, he had come across a few of them in the sacred book of charm magic. He knew that some weapons could transform into magic weapons once some magic characters were attached to them. Then, these weapons could be bestowed with magic powers. As a result, they'd become far mightier than any ordinary weapon. For instance, a weapon could exude rotating flames if some fire element magic characters were imprinted on it. Therefore, the magic weapons commanded incredible might in comparison to ordinary weapons. However, not all weapons could be turned into a magic weapon. The reason was simple: a material of extremely high quality was needed to promote an ordinary weapon to a magic weapon. An ordinary weapon couldn't withstand magic powers. It was said that some mystical weapons were far superior to any magic weapons. They belonged to the realm of godly power, they even had their own intelligence. It was also said that there was fiercer and abstruse existence above spirit tools. But, that was far beyond Shi Mu's reach. I thought about this once. It's true that I know the ways to make magic weapons. Unfortunately, this blade became more solid after it was forged. So, an ordinary flame couldn't smelt it, forget about imprinting patterns on it. Zhao Ping shook his head and threw a wry smile. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard these words. The only reason he wanted to spend such a huge amount of money for this blade was its special material quality. He wanted to transform it into a magic weapon later. But, it isn't impossible. I once heard from a senior disciple in the Flaming Beast group that young Master Zhu of the General Library has a golden lizard. It has been summoned from another space. That lizard's spitted venom has the power to corrode almost all kind of metals. The venom could make this metal a bit soft, Zhao Ping hurriedly added as he noticed the change in Shi Mu's complexion. Really? Shi Mu was dumbfounded. Yes, it's true. I even saw that senior disciple beg young Master Zhu for a bit of the lizard's venom. Then, he imprinted magic characters on his high-quality long sword, which was previously impossible to dent. The venom was extremely fierce. This black blade has a special material quality. But, it's still a metal. So, there won't be any issue, Zhao Ping replied in a confident manner. Brother Zhao, thanks a lot for your guidance. Now, I must pay young Master Zhu a visit. Shi Mu pondered for a moment. Then, he clasped his hands across his chest and spoke respectfully. Then, he returned the black blade into the wooden box. After that, he picked up the box and hurriedly walked out of the shop. He arrived at the second floor of the General Library half an hour later. Well, how are you, kid? Why did you show up here this time? He had barely set his foot on the floor when a shrill voice resounded. The parrot in the huge golden cage started to flap its wings when he saw him. Then, it tilted its head to look at Shi Mu, and shouted out loudly. Chapter 92, To Communicate with Another Dimension. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. I'm looking for young Master Ju. Is he available? Shi Mu strolled his eyes around the general library as he spoke. But, he couldn't see the familiar mountain-like shadow anywhere. Master Ju is practicing in another room. So, you'll have to wait here, the parrot replied in an impatiently. Then, it started to comb and prune its wings with its beak. Shi Mu nodded. Then, he started to look for a chair. He had visited the general library several times during the past 6 months. Therefore, he had become close to young Master Ju. He had met this shouting parrot a number of times as well. Young Master Ju had started to value him even more once he had got the hang of making magic charms. He felt that Shi Mu had more potential than any other disciple. Shi Mu had seized the opportunity to learn several techniques related to charm and formulas magic from young Master Ju. Young boy, what do you wish to talk to the master about? Cai the parrot waited for a moment. But, it got bored since Shi Mu didn't speak anything. So, it asked. Shi Mu heard the question. However, he didn't answer Cai. Instead, he shot a glance at it and asked, Cai, you've been with young Master Ju for so long. Are you aware of a golden lizard that Master Ju has summoned from another dimension? Oh, you are talking about that annoying lizard. Of course, I know it. It can only rely on its coarse and thick skin. It almost bit me once. I'll swallow it alive, sooner or later, the parrot replied angrily. Shi Mu's eyes lit up as he heard this. Why are you asking about that lizard? The parrot squinted its eyes and asked Shi Mu. Shi Mu hesitated for a moment. But then, he brought up the matter of him going to request 1 bottle lizard's venom from young Master Ju. The parrot flapped its wings as he listened to him. Meanwhile, a strange look flashed through its eyes, there was a touch of consideration in them. However, it remained silent with its beak tightly shut. So, do you know anything about it? Shi Mu's heart was beating fast. The parrot glanced at Shi Mu, but remained silent. Suddenly, it outstretched its wings and patted the small bowl in the cage with its wings. It was an indication for Shi Mu to put something in its bowl. A mild smile spread across Shi Mu's face as he saw this. He quickly fished out a few black nuts from his bosom. Those nuts were the size of an infant's fist. Then, he threw them into its bowl. The parrot issued a cheerful cry. Then, it picked up 1 nut with its beak and swallowed it. A contented look flashed across its eyes. Shi Mu burst out laughing as he saw this. The parrot knew a lot of important information even though it was boisterous. Therefore, Shi Mu always carried the parrot's favorite food, a kind of a round fruit, whenever he visited this place. Cai, you can say it now. Tisk, wait for the master. You can request him to help you. Master Ju is carrying out an experiment. So, he's running out of money. Your request will be fulfilled if you can support him financially. The parrot clicked its tongue and replied in an ambiguous manner as he continued to enjoy the flavor of its foods. Shi Mu revealed a pensive expression as he heard these words. Then, he nodded. Young Master Ju's needed something. This was a good sign for Shi Mu since he was afraid that young Master Ju might turn him down. By the way, Tisk. Wait for him, then request as much as possible. Tisk. Make that fat and stupid lizard spit out venom. Tisk, the trace of a sinister smile spread across the parrot's face. But then, it quickly restrained itself and resumed its solemn expression. Afterwards, it continued to devour the nuts. Shi Mu felt like laughing as he heard this. It seemed that this giant parrot had suffered a lot on account of that golden lizard. Therefore, it was thinking of a way to take its revenge. Request as much as possible? Cai, it seems that you've got a lot of feathers these days. Do you want me to help you pull out the colorful ones from your tail? Suddenly, a huge mountain-like person appeared in front of the cage. It was young Master Ju. He fiercely stared at the parrot's cage as he scolded it. Master, please forgive me. Please don't pull out my tail feathers. The two that you had previously plucked out have grown back with great difficulty. The parrot was frightened, so much so that it dropped half of the nut from its beak. Then, it hastily covered its head with its wings, and hid its tail under its body. It then begged in quivering voice. "I'll deal with you later," young Master Ju snorted as he ignored the garrulous parrot. Then, his eyes turned and fell on Shi Mu. Young Master Ju, Shi Mu had risen from his chair. He respectfully clasped his hands across his chest and greeted young Master Ju. Young Master Ju looked at him from head to toe, but remained silent. Suddenly, a hesitant expression appeared across his face. "Young Master Ju, your humble disciple has come to ask you a favor." "There's no need to say it again. I'm not deaf. I've heard the conversation you had with this boisterous parrot." Shi Mu had uttered only a few words when he was interrupted by young Master Ju. The parrot revealed one of its eyes from the cover of its feathers as it heard these words. Then, it dug its head back into its feathers with a whiz sound. "Will young Master Ju bestow me with a bottle of the golden lizard's venom? I'll compensate you with whatever I've got right now." Shi Mu's thought for a moment, and then asked. "I don't need money. Keep your poor amount of money in your pocket. I don't care for it. I'll give you 1 bottle of venom for free. But I want you to help me in exchange for my favor," young Master Ju replied with a smile. Shi Mu's complexion changed as he heard this. Young Master Ju was an elder in the sect. He had extraordinary skills and profound cultivation. How could a kid like him help such a proficient man? "May I ask young Master Ju to please enlighten me? What kind of help do you want from me?" Shi Mu remained silent for a while. He then asked. "As that clumsy bird just said. I'm performing an experiment of soul arts. I was trying to communicate with another realm. But then I got stuck. I know that you've hit 5 degrees in spatial sensing. So, you should be able to help me," young Master Ju explained. "Communicating with a different dimension. Can this be dangerous? You must be aware that this disciple has just become a magician practitioner," Shi Mu replied with a bitter smile. "I can't say that it's 100% safe. But, you don't need to worry about it. There won't be any problem if you follow my instructions at the appointed time. I've communicated with other dimensions living beings a couple of times. I'm experienced in this process. So, you can trust me." The obese man threw a glance at the parrot as he spoke haughtily. "So, that's how it is." Shi Mu nodded as he thought about this matter. "The dimension I'm preparing to contact is called the Dead Spirit World. There has never been a soul magician who could summon a living creature from another dimension to our world. You'll return safe and sound as long as you don't provoke those mighty creatures." Young Master Ju noticed that Shi Mu was indecisive. Therefore, he explained to ease his tension. "This is an extremely important matter. Can young Master Ju allow a few days to this disciple to consider it carefully?" Shi Mu said discreetly. "Certainly. But, you must give me an answer within 5 days, regardless of whether you accept it or not. I'll go ahead with my experiment in any case. I'll hold the communication ritual irrespective of whether you participate or not," the obese man stated in an indifferent tone. "Young Master Ju, this disciple will take his leave now." Shi Mu bowed and bid his farewell. "Go." The obese man beckoned with his hand. Chapter 93, The Mysterious Array of the Soaring Star. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu reached his stone house in a few minutes. He sat down cross-legged on his stone bed, and started to gaze at the long black blade that hung on one of the walls. His brows furrowed as the trace of an irresolute expression flashed across his face. He kept thinking about young Master Ju's proposal throughout the day. He had spent a huge sum of money to purchase the black meteoric iron blade. It would be a complete waste of the natural resources if he couldn't turn it into a magic weapon. Shi Mu didn't trust young Master Ju's words in an absolute manner. However, he was intrigued by the mystery of interacting with a different dimension. Moreover, he was interested in the strange creatures of the other dimensions, such as the golden lizard. In addition, he could get an opportunity to find a couple of animals from another realm if he were to extend his support to young Master Ju. Young Master Ju seemed to be proficient in this field, as both the golden lizard and the giant parrot were summoned by him from different dimensions. Therefore, Shi Mu didn't need to worry about his safety under this veteran's watch. Moreover, Shi Mu was familiar with the obese man's disposition. He knew that young Master Ju was a discreet person. So, he wouldn't risk his life if he wasn't sure. Shi Mu continued to think about the matter for a few days. Then, he finally made a firm decision. He visited the general library a few days later. Young Master Ju's face started to beam with happiness as he heard that Shi Mu had agreed to assist him in establishing communication with a different dimension. They decided to hold the ceremony 3 days later. The ceremony would be conducted at noon at young Master Ju's residence. Young Master Ju pulled out a white jade slip, and carved his address on it. Then, he tossed it towards Shi Mu. Shi Mu seized the opportunity to inquire more about communicating with a different dimension. Then, he departed from the general library. 3 days later, at noontime, Shi Mu advanced towards the foot of a black mountain under the scorching sun. He noticed that the hill didn't have any trees. It only had some small shrubs, and disordered flowers and plants. The ranges of the hill seemed to be made up of a strange phosphorus rock. Only a few stone houses could be seen. They looked like mushrooms as they were clustered at different places throughout the mountain ranges. This barren and desolate mountain peak was the 13th mountain peak of the Black Demon sect. Shi Mu had never visited this place even though he had been living nearby. There was only one path which was made of blue stone. It was around 10 feet wide. It meandered from the foot of the mountain to the top. This road branched out another long narrow road. This narrow road was connected to a 20 or 30 feet high, simple yet crude, stone house. A few independent 2- or 3-storied houses could be seen scattered around. According to young Master Ju's jade slip, his residence was situated in a remote place very close to the top of the peak. It couldn't be found by those who weren't told the address. Shi Mu arrived at the top of the peak after he had taken 7 to 8 turns. Finally, he located young Master Ju's stone house. He was about to knock when the door opened on its own. "Hurry up, come inside. I've been waiting for you for so long," an impatient voice was heard from inside the house. It was the obese man's voice. "Young Master Ju, please accept my apologies. I had an insight as I was deeply submerged in my practice. So, I couldn't keep track of time, and got late." Shi Mu spotted the mountain-like shadow as soon as he entered the house. Young Master Ju was waiting for him in the hall with an expressionless face. Shi Mu advanced towards him and apologized. "Well, a practitioner can have a sudden enlightenment, and that's your chance. Anyways, the preparatory work has already been completed. I was waiting for you to begin." The obese man's facial expression became relaxed. Practitioners often experienced the bliss of sudden enlightenment. So, it was normal for a practitioner to forget about things during that period. Suddenly, Shi Mu noticed a shadow in the left corner of the hall. The huge shadow was lying on the floor. It was a 10 feet long monstrous lizard. There was a horn on the beast's head, and it had 3 pairs of bestial feet. Its entire body was covered in green-colored thin shells. Suddenly, its long and narrow eyes stared at Shi Mu. They were pale green in color. The lizard seemed to be under a command that had restrained its movement. So, it lay motionless. "Is this beast the legendary golden lizard?" Shi Mu's eyes brightened up as he pointed at the lizard. "Yes. This golden lizard's saliva is extremely poisonous. But, it has a wondrous use as well. It has the power to melt gold, and transform it into a weapon," young Master Ju nodded and explained. Then, he became silent and started to walk towards a wall. After that, he stretched out his plump hand and pressed somewhere on the wall. Boom! A loud sound was heard. Suddenly, a stone door emerged on the smooth wall with a thunderous sound. It revealed a dark passageway. The ceremony will be carried out in this secret room. Follow me, the obese man turned around and said. Then, he entered the passageway. Shi Mu followed him hastily. They walked down the spiral passage for some time. Then, they finally entered the secret room. The room was 40 feet long and 10 feet wide. The walls of the entire room had been illuminated with butter torches. This room was made up of a stone similar to that of the house. A huge circular pattern was spread over the entire floor. There was no decoration in the room, it was empty. Shi Mu noticed that this gigantic circular pattern had a little resemblance with the pattern that he had seen in the general library. The biggest difference was that there were more than 6 indentations in this pattern. 5 egg-sized indentations were evenly distributed throughout the circle. But, the 6th and last one was as big as a human head, it was situated in the center of the pattern. The center was the intersection where the heavenly patterns and charm characters crowded intensively. Shi Mu's expressions changed as he saw this. He recalled that according to the book Comprehensive Introduction to Formula Arts, considerable consumption of spirit power was needed once a huge and complex circular formulas pattern like this was activated. Therefore, one must keep spirit stones for the supply of a steady flow of energy. The bigger formulas needed the specialist to constantly replace the spirit stones. These 5 smaller indentations would be the place where the spirit stones were supposed to be placed, the bigger one would be placed at the center of this arrangement. A trace of excitement flashed through Shi Mu's eyes. He realized that the slip of Comprehensive Introduction to Formula Arts was about the elementary knowledge of the formula art. There were only a few complete formulas in it. And now, he had gotten the chance to see one of these formulas with his own eyes. He wished to carve it in his memory so that he could study it in detail after he had returned to his own place. Shi Mu noticed that young Master Ju was inspecting the formula. He seemed to have no time to pay attention to Shi Mu. Suddenly, Shi Mu's pupils got enlarged by 1-fold. Each charm character was magnified 10 times in his golden pupils. Every character became extremely clear to him. He noticed that some complex charm characters in the circle were the combination of a few simple characters of the 5 elements. Also, every complex character was vaguely connected by some heavenly patterns. Suddenly, young Master Ju stood up. He seemed to have finished inspecting the circular formula. The golden color disappeared from Shi Mu's eyes as he saw this. His eyes resumed to their normal state in an instant. This circular formula is called the mysterious array of the soaring star. It's one of the space attribute circular arrays. We'll have to rely on it to perform the ceremony. I think it's extremely difficult for you to grasp this. It would be good if you don't aim too high since it's beyond your perception. The obese man sensed that Shi Mu was interested in the complex pattern that was drawn on the floor. So, he chuckled and cautioned. Chapter 94, The Art of Capturing Spirits. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Thank you so much for your guidance, young Master Ju. Shi Mu cupped his hands in obeisance and expressed his gratitude. Shi Mu, do you know what conditions are required for a soul magician to communicate with the other world? The obese man sized him up a few times. Then, he changed the topic of the conversation. Shi Mu shook his head in a puzzled manner. Remember, a soul magician needs to fulfill 3 major conditions in order to establish communication with other dimensions. First, one must have the remains of a strong living creature from a different dimension. Second, one should know the exact position of that dimension. Third, one must have a strong space sensing ability. Young Master Ju raised 3 fingers as he explained. Shi Mu became absorbed in thoughts as he heard this. We've to communicate with the dead spirit world. And, the first 2 conditions have been met. But, my space sensing ability isn't powerful enough. So, I can't rely on it. Maybe that's why I've failed thrice. So, I asked you to help me. Young Master Ju explained the true reason for asking for Shi Mu's help. Shi Mu gazed at the circular array as he heard this. Suddenly, his heart was struck by a realization. He understood what young Master Zhu wanted him to do. The obese man noticed that Shi Mu had grasped his point. So, he nodded in satisfaction. Then, he explained some matters and theories related to this communication ceremony that a soul magician must know in order to cope with any contingency. Shi Mu listened in a careful manner. Soon, everything became clear to him. A soul magician could plant his spirit mark into the body of any feeble creature living in the other dimension, if his spirit succeeded in reaching there in a smooth manner. Then, he could summon this creature through a corresponding means once he returned to his own world. The creature would become his permanent slave once he had established a contract with it. Shi Mu thought of the golden lizard as he heard this. That lizard was young Master Zhu's spirit pet. Shi Mu couldn't stop his heart from beating faster as he recalled the conspicuous and astonishing ability that lizard possessed. Young Master Zhu, can I look for a spirit pet for myself in the dead spirit world? Shi Mu asked hesitantly. Cough. To be honest, there aren't any issues in that. But, you aren't an official soul magician. So, it would be almost impossible for you to grasp the technique of planting a spirit mark, that too in such a short period of time. But, I can make an exception. I can impart the simplest way of capturing spirit technique to you. But, this technique can only be executed if the practitioner possesses enough spirit power. But, the technique would be very simple to grasp. The obese man's eyebrows creased as he heard Shi Mu's question. But then, he replied. Thanks a lot, young Master Zhu. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness as he heard that he could learn a magic art for free. He bowed to young Master Zhu with respect. Don't thank me in advance. First listen to what this old man has to say, then decide later whether you can comprehend it or not. This technique is quite simple to comprehend. But, it doesn't come without downsides. This technique is excessively shallow. You can capture a creature, but it must be tenfold weaker than your current spirit power. In addition, since you'll be stepping across the world, the effect of this art wouldn't be small. So, considering your spirit power as a magician practitioner, this old man reckons that you only look for the smallest and weakest creatures like worms or insects. There's no way that you can plant your mark on a stronger creature. The obese man Zhu mused for a moment. Then, he blurted out everything related to this matter. I can capture only insects as my spirit pet. Shi Mu's brows furrowed. Besides, the spirit of a soul magician can stay in a different dimension for only a limited period of time. As per my experience, my soul can stay in a different world for a time a person takes to finish a small cup of tea. Considering your spirit power as a magician practitioner, you can probably stay there for a dozen or more breaths' time. It would be extremely difficult to find an appropriate living creature in this short period of time, let alone plant the spirit mark. The obese man shook his head as he explained further. Shi Mu's complexion turned unsightly as he heard these words. Then, he became silent. Even if you gain access to the dead spirit world without a hitch, the summoning ceremony wouldn't be that easy afterwards. It costs a considerable amount of resources to carry out this process. Moreover, luck plays an important role. I sacrificed almost every penny I had to summon this rotten parrot. And, the outcome is so pathetic. This lousy parrot bawls all day long, it's absolutely worthless. This shatters me from inside. Well, now I've explained everything to you. Do you still want to attempt it? The man groaned a few times as he thought about the lousy parrot that had cost him his every penny. His complexion had become gloomy. This disciple still wants to try his luck. I hope young Master Zhu would help me. Shi Mu mulled over it several times. Finally, he decided to give it a shot. You're extremely determined. So, I'll give you half an hour to practice this capturing spirit technique. You can come to me in case you get stuck somewhere. Young Master Zhu didn't argue further. A grey slip appeared in his right hand as he flipped it. He then placed it against his forehead, and started to record the art of capturing spirits. He flicked his right hand after a while. The grey slip fell into Shi Mu's hand. Then, young Master Zhu sat down cross-legged in front of the huge circular formula. He closed his eyes and sank into a deep meditation. Shi Mu didn't disturb him. Instead, he found a corner and sat down cross-legged. He pasted the grey jade slip on his forehead, and started to memorize its contents. The formula of the magic art was small and simple. Therefore, Shi Mu memorized it quickly. This art was indeed easy to comprehend, as young Master Zhu had said. Shi Mu had already started to practice it with closed eyes. The charm characters started to swirl within his mind in a continuous manner. His lips would occasionally move. Simultaneously, his finger would gesticulate something in the air. He took the help of young Master Zhu only once throughout the entire process. The obese man readily gave him directions to clear his doubts. Shi Mu opened his eyes after half an hour. A strange glint flashed across his pupils. Suddenly, his lips moved as his right hand pulled out a strange magic art. Then, a pale white charm character floated out of his palm into the air. After that, it vanished into thin air. Your perception ability is pretty good, you grasped this art in no time. A faint voice was heard. Shi Mu hadn't noticed that young Master Zhu had stood up, he was standing motionless. I was lucky to have young Master Zhu by my side to guide me in the best possible way. Shi Mu sprang up by pressing his palms on the floor. He smiled as he expressed his gratitude to young Master Zhu. The obese man waved his hand towards him. Then, he rummaged in his shirt and fished out some stuff. These were several sparkling silver charm papers, a palm-sized piece of a black bone and 5 spirit stones that were twice the size of a low-grade spirit stone. All 5 stones were different in colors: red, yellow, green, blue, and gold. In addition, there was also a round earthen silver bowl with a pair of birds imprinted on its surface. These birds had just one leg. Shi Mu was startled to see the 5 spirit stones. They seemed similar to the rumored middle-level spirit stone considering their size and the rich spiritual power emitted by them. The dark piece of bone seemed to be some kind of animal's skull on the basis of its structure. However, it was badly damaged, and there were multiple cracks over its surface. So, it was extremely hard to tell which living creature it had belonged to. Then, Shi Mu's eyes moved and got stuck on the earthen silver bowl. Innumerable tiny charm characters were engraved on its surface. They looked like stars. They were linked by some sort of rules. However, that design of those one-legged birds pair seemed a little inharmonious from these swarm of characters. Chapter 95, Chaotic Space. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. The preparations seemingly took a long time. However, they had taken only a fraction of a second in reality. The obese man didn't wait for Shi Mu to see the earthen silver bowl properly. He placed it in the center of the circular pattern. Then, he placed the 5 middle-level spirit stones in their respective indentations around the circle. This paper charm contains the record of the dead spirit world's spatial coordinates. You stick the paper charm to the piece of bone as soon as I activate this magic array. Then, our ceremony will begin, the obese man spoke with a dignified expression on his face. Then, he handed over the piece of black bone and the silver paper charm to Shi Mu. Shi Mu held both the things carefully. He then entered the gigantic circle with the paper charm in his right hand and the piece of bone in his left. He sat down cross-legged on the floor, and faced the direction of the silver earthen bowl. The obese man also went inside the circle, and sat down cross-legged opposite Shi Mu. Young Master Zhu's fingers started to move extremely fast as he muttered an abstruse incantation. Shi Mu couldn't help but gaze at young Master Zhu as several streaks of white light flashed from his palm and flew towards the bowl. The tiny characters on the surface of the bowl lit up. Then, a strong wave of magic power spread in all directions like a sea wave. Suddenly, the charm characters and heavenly pattern on the formula of the soaring stars started to emit a bright luminescence. Then, a huge fluctuation started to flow in the air, so much so that the entire room was filled with a droning sound. Some places even began to get twisted and blurred. Suddenly, darkness spread in front of Shi Mu's eyes. It seemed as if all the butter torches in the room had been extinguished. Then, something strange happened. The circular pattern underneath them began to dazzle with a miraculous glow. It exuded a layer of multicolored light, and it started to bubble up from its surface. Then, it enveloped the both of them. Both of them seemed to be attired in cloaks of red clouds that appeared to have been made up of multicolored light that constituted of vibrant colors. Suddenly, a cloud of fog looking like silver mist bubbled up from the sparkling silver bowl placed in the center. Then, the silver mist whirled from the silver bowl and slowly rose up. Its size started to expand. The star-like silver light dots within the mist started to twinkle as it grew bigger and wider. These silver light dots stood out in the dark background of the room. The room had started to look like a vast and starry sky. Shi Mu was astonished as he witnessed this mesmerizing and dreamlike scene. "What are you doing? Still gawking?" Shi Mu jolted out of his trance as he heard young Master Ju's words. He then pressed the silver paper charm in his hand. He stuck the silver paper charm on the bone piece with a loud puff sound. Suddenly, a group of dazzling silver lights burst out and got submerged in the bone. "Shi Mu, you must stay close to me once we enter the chaotic space," the obese man shot a glance at Shi Mu as he said. "Yes." Shi Mu restrained his awestruck heart and replied. The obese man didn't say anything more. Instead, he flicked his hand. The charm characters engraved on the surface of the silver bowl responded with a flash. The pair of one-legged birds came to life in unison. They flew out of the pattern, and got submerged into their foreheads with a flash. Shi Mu felt that his eyes had become heavy. He was under the spell of a trance before he could understand anything. Suddenly, his spirit left his body, and got attached to one of the silver birds. That bird then submerged in the bowl again. A limitless space appeared before his eyes. It was like a vast sea with various kinds of fuzzy objects hovering on its surface. Some objects were near, while some of them were very far. Some of them were shining, while some looked dark. Shi Mu felt an inexplicable and distant force drawing him to its side. "How are things with you? Have you felt the traction force of the dead spirit world yet?" Young Master Ju's voice reverberated in Shi Mu's mind. Shi Mu was startled to discover that he had turned into a white and luminous dot. There was a bigger luminous dot next to him. It was young Master Ju. "Yes. I can feel it, but vaguely," Shi Mu replied subconsciously. "Good, good. Now, we'll follow this traction force together. You mustn't approach these fuzzy objects. I'll cover you." The obese man let out a long breath. He couldn't conceal his excitement. Shi Mu answered and started to follow the inexplicable force. He followed the obese man's luminous dot as he floated forward. This chaotic space was extremely strange. The only thing that Shi Mu could feel was complete emptiness. It was a kind of an illusion. However, there were some strange and wonderful objects that piqued Shi Mu's interest. Each one of them was a different and independent space according to young Master Ju. They continued to advance towards the distant place by following a fixed route. The inscrutable strange traction force grew stronger and clearer with the passage of time. Shi Mu eventually started to get a little bored by seeing such a monotonous scene around him. Suddenly, he realized that a huge amount of his spirit power had already been consumed up. "Young Master Ju, does traveling in this chaotic space consume one's spirit power?" Shi Mu asked anxiously. "Of course. This goes for not only this chaotic space, but for every other space. In fact, the consumption of our spirit power in these spaces is considerably higher. Your spirit will be forcefully pulled back to your original space by the power of the circular pattern once your spirit power gets exhausted." A cold shiver ran down Shi Mu's spine as he heard this. Suddenly, he realized that his and young Master Ju's luminous dots were shrouded in a thin layer of multicolored rays. Young Master Zhu had explained this before. This multicolored layer was the key to ensure the return of these two people to their world. Don't worry. Your spirit is much stronger than what I had expected. So, we can easily arrive at the dead spirit world if we don't face any trouble on our way, young Master Zhu's voice resounded again. Shi Mu felt relieved as he heard these words. Suddenly, a glittering ray of light swept over them. Shi Mu noticed that it was a long, narrow, and shiny object like a dagger. This object has got closer to them as they were talking, they hadn't noticed as it had approached them. The object was emitting a hazy and ambiguous halo, it was similar to the light of a firefly against the dark sky. Therefore, it had attracted Shi Mu's attention. That's not good. Hurry up. Come closer to me. That object is highly dangerous. You mustn't get pulled by it. The obese man reduced his speed as he warned Shi Mu in a loud voice. Shi Mu was taken aback. He started to get closer to young Master Zhu's luminous dot. Shi Mu was about to get closer to him when an irresistible traction force pulled him towards that long and shining object. The original traction force of the chaotic space got weakened at the same time. Shi Mu was panic-stricken. He exerted his utmost strength to resist this formidable force. Another huge strength passed from behind at the same time. It was young Master Zhu's luminous dot. The effort stemmed from young Master Zhu's strong strength counterbalanced the force. However, Shi Mu was still slowly getting pulled towards that bright object. Shi Mu was gripped by an extreme terror. Chapter 96, The Dead Spirit World. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu's heart sank. He had nearly given up hope. But then, he felt that the backward pull had increased in strength. His body felt extremely light as he got pulled back towards young Master Zhu's luminous dot. Then, the small and big luminous dots rushed away at lightning speed. The traction force of that glittering object receded as it became smaller. Finally, Shi Mu heaved a sigh of relief. He felt that the traction force that had previously weakened and vanished had reappeared. You got lucky this time. But, don't expect me to help you if you get trapped again. I don't have enough spirit power to save you again, the obese man's annoyed voice resounded. Thank you so much for your help, young Master Zhu. Shi Mu replied in an embarrassed tone. Young Master Zhu's spirit as a luminous dot flickered a few times. It seemed as if his anger hadn't yet receded. But, he didn't say anything more on the subject. Young Master Zhu, what would have happened if I had got sucked into that shining object? Shi Mu couldn't restrain himself from asking the question. Can it be that you're thinking about exploring an unknown space? There are many spaces that can easily erase the connection of the magic circle from your body. Then, you won't be able to return to your body even when your spirit power gets exhausted. It's needless to say what happens after that, you know the consequences. Anyways, let's move quickly. The obese man thundered angrily. Shi Mu was silent. However, he felt a slight warmth in his heart. A huge amount of the obese man's spirit power had been consumed up while displaying the magic art to pull Shi Mu out of that perilous situation. This proved one thing: young Master Zhu had a soft side, and it was full of kindness even though he was famous for his hot temperament. They encountered several shining objects on their way. Some of them were relatively closer. But, both of them had learnt from their mistake. So, they made detours from quite afar. They didn't bump into another mishap. Their spirit power was about to get completely consumed up when they finally saw a fog-shaped fuzzy object. It was emitting a black light. Suddenly, everything became clear to Shi Mu. He realized that this fuzzy object was the source of the previous gravitational force that had led them here. Arrived. Shi Mu's spirits were lifted as the obese man's joyous voice resounded in his mind. The two luminous dots got drifted towards the fog-shaped hazy object under the effect of its massive traction force. Bang! Shi Mu felt as if he had entered a mass of soft and black fog. A strange force hit his and young Master Zhu's luminous dots as soon as they entered. This transmitted a powerful jolt to them, and they got separated from each other. Suddenly, the light became brighter before Shi Mu's eyes. Then, a somber world appeared in his sight. He noticed that he had turned into a hazy, grey, and empty shadow. It seemed that he was floating midair like a dark cloud. Shi Mu looked around and realized that it was a gloomy world. The sky was grey and gloomy like a murky dusk. Moreover, the grey clouds were continuously tumbling like a cloud of fog. 12 blood-red moons were hanging in the sky. They were exuding bright red rays of light. However, these moons didn't render any radiance. Instead, they made everything look murkier and gloomier. In fact, there wasn't any trace of visibility. The air was filled with black and cold winds. The grayish-black ground was covered with several mud pools, air bubbles were bubbling out of them. Piles of white skeletons of unknown creatures were floating on their surface. Strong blasts of wind were howling across the sky. They seemed to be infused with a foul odor. Shi Mu strove hard to adapt to the sense of gloominess that pervaded this place. The world before his eyes had lived up to its name. It was the dead spirit world. Shi Mu had no clue about young Master Ju's whereabouts. He looked around a few times to analyze the situation. Suddenly, a burst of a clamorous fight sound transmitted from ahead. There seemed to be a huge number of creatures. But, Shi Mu couldn't see them as a hill had blocked his view. Suddenly, Shi Mu had an idea. His shadow trembled as it shot towards the hill. He had flown past the hill within a second. The scene that appeared before his eyes took his breath away. There was a vast and boundless wilderness under the hill. 2 armies of human skeletons were immersed in a fierce battle. They were massive in number, there were at least 50 to 60,000 skeletons. A faint light was glowing in the eyes of these human skeletons. Some of them were wielding gigantic knives made of bones, some were fighting with sharp bone spears. Some of them didn't have any weapons. Several of them seemed to be badly damaged. However, they were killing each other ceaselessly. Some of the skeletons stood out in a peculiar way. Some of the skeletons were riding skeleton horses that wore black amours. Their bodies were covered in several wounds, and these wounds were discharging a watery substance. Their movement was extremely slow, like that of a zombies. There were some bone tigers, bone snakes, and other dead creatures as well. However, Shi Mu didn't pay any attention to them. He was attracted by 2 giant creatures who were flying above the armies. These 2 monstrous creatures were also indulged in a furious battle. A continual sad and shrill ear-piercing roar could be heard along with the howls of the cold gusts. One of these monstrous creatures was a gigantic skeleton of a hound. He was nearly 90 meters long. Its huge stature was covered with rotten flesh. It was a disgusting sight. However, it couldn't conceal the astonishing momentum with which it was soaring in the sky. 3 distinct skulls could be seen on the hound's neck. The left one was a dead skull, and the middle one was a rotten head. The right head was alive and new, it was covered with dense black hair. But, there wasn't any trace of flesh on it. These heads were constantly discharging stinking saliva. The other monstrous creature was the skeleton of a black bird. It was as huge as the hound's. Half-rotten black feathers were hanging all over its body. They revealed large patches of white bone beneath them. Its wings were stirring up intermittent gusts of cold wind. It had a long spur tail that was moving smoothly. It was frequently issuing shrill noises. Both of them emitted a formidable and terrifying aura. Shi Mu had seen many powerhouses. But, he had never experienced such an astonishing might. It had far surpassed his imagination. Each of their breaths was powerful enough to grind hundreds of skeleton soldiers into pieces. Suddenly, the 3-headed hound pounced on its opponent. Its gigantic body moved forward at an alarming speed. Then, its left head nipped one of the wings of that monstrous black bird. The bird couldn't dodge this attack. It let out a furious scream, and thrust its sword-like beak into the hound's neck, while its talons grasped the hound's lower abdomen. This attack engraved severe deep wounds on the hound's body. However, the hound didn't seem to feel any pain. Instead, its other two heads set into action. They also bit the bird's wing. Simultaneously, its sturdy forelegs grabbed the bird's body. Then, the three heads exerted a huge strength, and tore the bird's wing apart. Snap! A loud sound was heard. A wing of the giant bird was torn apart. The bird staggered, and lost its balance. But, its beak and talons didn't lose their grip on the hound. Therefore, the two huge creatures crashed onto the ground together. Thousands of skeleton soldiers were crushed into pieces as the two monstrous creatures crashed on top of them. The remaining skeleton soldiers ran further away from the spot. However, the two monsters didn't pay any attention to them. Instead, they continued their fierce battle on the ground. Shi Mu was dumbfounded as he saw this. Suddenly, his shadow flickered. This was an indication that he was about to dissipate. Shi Mu felt shaken up. He cursed himself for his negligence. He could have only stayed there for a short period of time since his spirit power was weak. He had wasted precious time. Chapter 97, Planting the Mark. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu quit watching the battle between the huge creatures as this thought crossed his mind. He looked around to find a creature to plant his spirit mark on. Only a few strange worms could be seen wiggling on the ground near him. Apart from that, a few bones were scattered around. No other form of life was visible near him. Each of these worms were as thick as a human lip. They seemed to have made their way out of the earth to devour the scattered skeletons of other creatures. Will I have to pick a worm to plant my mark on? She was surprised. He looked around anxiously. Suddenly, a loud rumble was heard from ahead. The two gigantic monsters that were entangled in their fight had got separated. In fact, the three-headed hound had been sent flying. The black bird staggered to its feet. It then turned its gaze to look at the wing that had just been torn. Its eyes blazed with fury as it issued a blood-curdling scream. Then, it stretched its mouth wide open, and spouted a massive yellow whirlwind. Bang! Suddenly, the huge stature of the hound flew into the sky as a huge whirlwind condensed, and struck it. The surrounding skeleton soldiers were also affected by the whirlwind. Numerous skeletons were sent flying into the sky along with sand and rolling pebbles. They were then thrown in different directions by the strong whirlwind. Bang! Bang! Around 10 skeleton soldiers crashed onto the ground near Shi Mu. Most of them smashed into pieces right away. The area around him started to flood with countless shining fragments of white bones. However, one of the skeletons didn't shatter into pieces like the others, only one of its arms was broken. Suddenly, the skeleton staggered to its feet. Shi Mu was exhilarated to see the skeleton getting up from the ground. His spirit dashed towards that skeleton as he started to operate the art of capturing spirits. Suddenly, a pale white charm character flashed and got submerged in the skeleton's skull. It then got engraved in its mind. The skeleton was in a tragic state as it had withstood such a terrible fall. The pea-sized green flame flickering in its eye sockets, seemed as if it was about to extinguish. The skeleton didn't resist, it accepted Shi Mu's spirit mark in a calm manner. Shi Mu had just planted his mark when he felt that his spirit had lost its consciousness. Suddenly, his spirit disappeared with a loud rumbling sound. Then, it changed into a group of multicolored transparent light balls, and shot towards the distant place at an unimaginable speed. The green flame flickered within the skeleton's eye sockets. The murderous aura that its body had been emitting vanished into thin air. It stood motionless. Then, it looked towards the battle between the two skeleton armies in shock. Suddenly, it turned around and started to walk in the opposite direction of the battlefield. Suddenly, Shi Mu's unconscious body sitting cross-legged on the floor of the obese man's secret room opened its eyes with a jolt. Shi Mu realized that his spirit had returned to his body. He exhaled a long breath. He appeared exhausted due to the excessive consumption of his spirit power. However, his eyes revealed a trace of joy. He had set foot in another space for the first time. However, he had succeeded in planting his mark. It was only a skeleton, but it was better than a worm. This achievement had surpassed his expectations. Shi Mu started to practice the art of accumulating spirit power. Then, his exhausted spirit power began to restore. Suddenly, the plump body of young Master Ju sitting opposite Shi Mu trembled and became conscious. His chubby face glittered with exultation. It seemed that his journey had been fruitful. Judging from young Master Ju's cheerful appearance, it seems that he has reaped a huge benefit, much beyond his expectations. Shi Mu stood up and conjectured with a smile. He, yes, pretty good. You two seem to be in high spirits. Did you manage to plant your spirit mark in such a short span of time? The obese man asked in a surprised tone. This disciple has planted his spirit mark on a human skeleton, Shi Mu calmly replied. Young boy, you seem to possess the talent to be a spirit-grade soul magician. Skeletons are considered as low-grade creatures in the dead spirit world. But still, a magician practitioner like you shouldn't have achieved this feat. Young Master Ju touched his chin and expressed his admiration towards Shi Mu. Perhaps, I was lucky, Shi Mu said with a smile. Young Master Ju smiled back. But, he didn't inquire any further. Instead, he started to collect the magic material that was spread on the floor. The middle-level stones inserted in the indentations had lost their luster. It seemed that the spirit power inside them had been consumed. Shi Mu was shocked. The spirit power inside a middle-level stone was much more refined than a low-level stone. However, the spirit power of these stones had been consumed up in only a single experiment. Shi Mu finally understood the reason behind magic being considered to be an extremely expensive profession. I can tell by your expression that you want to summon that skeleton, don't you? The obese man pondered for a moment. Then, he asked with a faint smile. Young Master Ju can clearly see through me. Can you please impart the knowledge regarding the summoning technique? Shi Mu was taken aback by the obese man's question. Then, he asked in an embarrassed tone. The obese man nodded. Then, he left the stone room, and led Shi Mu into the entrance hall. He asked Shi Mu to wait for him. Then, he fetched a thin booklet and a translucent porcelain bottle from a room, and handed them over to Shi Mu. There was a pale yellow fluid inside the bottle, it was emitting bubbles. A faintly bitter smell oozed out from the bottle, and spread in the air. The art of summoning is recorded in this booklet. And this bottle contains the golden lizard's venom. You must be extremely careful while using this poison. Your bones disappear if it touches your body even a little bit, young Master Ju warned Shi Mu. Young Master Ju, thank you so much for your guidance. Shi Mu received the bottle carefully. Then, he opened the booklet. The art of summoning was indeed recorded in it. It didn't seem to be complicated. Shi Mu was able to understand it with a little difficulty. However, several materials were required to arrange the circular pattern. Moreover, those materials were quite expensive. Another art named the art of binding spirits was recorded in the last part of the booklet. Shi Mu went through it roughly, and deduced that it was the art of forming a contract. Young Master Ju, is this the art of binding spirits? Shi Mu's eyes flashed as he asked. The art of summoning mentioned in the booklet is about summoning creatures from a different space to our world. But, if you want to make that creature your servant, then you'll have to use the art of binding spirits to make a contract with the summoned creature. Otherwise, you won't be able to beckon it once your spirit mark disappears from its body. In case you successfully make a spirit contract, then you can summon it anytime. You won't have to arrange the circular pattern. You can summon it directly by the power of the spirit contract. But, it'll demand a constant consumption of your spirit power if you intend to keep it by your side. The amount of consumption of your spirit power will depend on whether the creature is strong or weak. You'll be able to retain a puny creature by your side for a long time if you become a spirit-grade magician just like me, the obese man explained. So, that's how it is, Shi Mu understood the entire matter. I must remind you that creatures from other spaces are hard to tame. So, it's not easy to make a contract with them. Anyways, you can leave if you don't have any other matter to discuss. I've got something important to take care of. Young Master Ju offered his last piece of advice. Then, he asked him to leave while pointing at the door. After that, he turned around and walked inside. Shi Mu bowed to him in obeisance, and expressed his gratitude. Then, he put away the booklet and left. Chapter 98, The Crafty Skeleton. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. In the dead spirit world, the grey sky was shrouded by low-pressure clouds. Strong winds swept across the sky like a sharp knife. The sky looked gloomy through the multiple layers of clouds, so much so that its sight could stir up a feeling of depression within any human. A single-armed human skeleton slowly advanced in the vicinity of a desolated hill. It was in an extremely tattered state. The skeleton had lost several bones from its body. Moreover, several cracks could be seen on the surface of its remaining bones. In fact, a deep fissure on its ribs had separated its body into two halves. The skeleton's bones produced a creaking sound every time it took a step forward. It seemed like it could fall apart any moment. However, it continued to advance forward. It would stop at regular intervals and raise its head towards the sky to gaze at the 12 blood moons for a few seconds. The green flame in its eye sockets would glitter in response. The skeleton set its foot in a slope of black soil after a while. He sized up the surrounding area, and continued to walk in a certain direction. Suddenly, the soil near its feet split open. Then, a white shadow sprang out of it. It was a strange white worm. It was as thick as a human's arm. It opened its mouth like a snake, and bit the skeleton's ankle. The green flame in the skeleton's eye sockets flickered. It couldn't move since its ankle was in the grip of that strange white worm. Suddenly, the skeleton bent and waved its arm across the worm. It then grabbed the rear part of its body with an unimaginable fast speed. Hiss! A mild sound was heard. The skeleton exerted pressure and pulled the worm apart. The worm didn't get any time to loosen its grip. It was torn into two halves. The front half of the worm's body was still dangling from the skeleton's ankle. This happened extremely fast, as if in a flash of lightning. It couldn't be imagined that a tattered and exhausted human skeleton could do such a thing. It had appeared as if the skeleton couldn't avoid the attack. But now, it seemed that it had deliberately set up a trap. The skeleton opened its mouth, and softly sucked in. A group of bean-sized green light balls flew out of the worm's corpse. The skeleton swallowed them quickly. The green flame within its eye sockets flickered slightly. It looked more exuberant now. A layer of faint black fog seemed to have appeared on its body. A few fissures on its ribs started to heal, and become smaller. Then, the black fog started to grow more and more somber. Finally, it disappeared. The green flame within its eye sockets sparkled a few times. Then, the skeleton continued to proceed at a slow pace. It seemed to be unaffected by what had happened a moment ago. Shi Mu left young Master Ju's residence, and returned to his stone house. He closed the door and sat down. A faint trace of excitement flashed through his eyes. He had learned a lot about the wonderful life of a soul magician while helping young Master Ju in carrying out his experiment. Moreover, this experience had rendered him a hope that he could possibly become a soul magician. However, the expenses of a soul magician seemed to be considerably higher than that of any other magicians. He couldn't afford it even though he was earning a decent amount of money. Shi Mu remained silent for a moment. He then took out the thin booklet from his bosom, and started to read it carefully. Then, he took a pen and a paper, and started to calculate the cost. The final number froze his blood even though it was a rough calculation. He found out that he needed 400,000 silvers to make arrangements for the art of summoning. Moreover, he would need to spend additional money in case he made a mistake during the process. He smiled bitterly and put away the booklet. He had recently received a payment after he had delivered a batch of paper charms to the Holy Spirit Association. So, he had accumulated around 300,000 silvers. However, he was still short of 100,000 silvers. Moreover, he needed money to continue his practice of the art of breeding heavenly elephants. He couldn't stop the practice of this art in order to perform the beckoning ceremony. Shi Mu sighed. He seemed to have given up on the thought of performing the summoning ceremony for the time being. He pondered for a moment. Then, he fished out the bottle of the golden lizard's venom. He decided to prioritize the matter of the meteoric iron blade since he couldn't summon the skeleton. He had the golden lizard's venom now. So, there was the possibility that he could upgrade the black blade to a magic weapon. But, he couldn't accomplish this task on his own. He needed to ask Zhao Ping for his assistance. Shi Mu believed that Zhao Ping wouldn't refuse him considering his current status as a charm magician. But, he needed to choose the charm spell that he would get engraved on the blade. Shi Mu took out the jade slips of the sacred book of charm magic. Then, he started to go through the various kinds of charm spells that were recorded in the book. 3 days later, in Zhao family's blacksmith's shop. Haha! Brother Shi is amazing. You obtained such a huge amount of the golden lizard's venom in such a short time. That golden lizard is young Master Zhu's treasure. We the Flaming Beast group had previously spent a huge amount of money and efforts to get a tiny drop of this venom. But, you've obtained a big bottle of it. It's truly admirable, Zhao Ping burst out into an exclamation as he looked at the porcelain bottle. They were in the reception room of the blacksmith's shop. I was just lucky. I happened to help young Master Zhu a few days ago. So, he gave me this bottle of venom. Now, we can try to upgrade the blade to a magic weapon. I came here to ask Brother Zhao to do me some favors. Shi Mu took a sip of tea from his teacup. He then said with a smile. Sure. No problem at all. I've made this black meteoric iron blade with my own hands. So, I would like to refine it into a magic weapon. Zhao Ping nodded without any hesitation. Shi Mu had brought a huge number of paper charms, as requested by Zhao Ping. Another charm magician wouldn't have been able to make such a large number of paper charms even in a month. However, Shi Mu had completed them in only a few days. Zhao Ping was surprised. This compelled him even more to pull Shi Mu to his side. Selecting a good day isn't as good as bumping into one. So, let's begin at once. Brother Shi, please follow me. Zhao Ping stood up and walked inside. They arrived in a stone room. This place was the forging room. It was a spacious room, and was around 70 meters in length. Several stoves were set up inside it in a perfect order. Each stove was blazing with raging flames. Therefore, the temperature of the room was extremely high. Several sturdy men with bare upper bodies were busy forging different weapons. Bang bang, continuous sound of striking metal rang everywhere. They nodded with respect as they saw Zhao Ping and Shi Mu enter the room. However, Zhao Ping didn't pay attention to them. Instead, he led Shi Mu to the door of the innermost room of the shop. It was an airtight stone room. This is my special forging room, it's reserved for me. It's a little better than the ones that you saw outside, Zhao Ping explained. He then pushed open the door. Shi Mu followed him. A scorching heat hit his face as he entered the room. Then, Zhao Ping shut the door again. This room wasn't big. It was made up of an unknown black stone. There was a stove inside the room. But, it was a lot smaller than the ones outside. The flame emanating out of this stove was pure white in color. Moreover, its heat was much more intense than the ones outside. Even the air over the stove was faintly rippling. There was one forging table inside the room besides this stove, no other equipment could be seen. Chapter 99, Superimposing the Charm Spell. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu noticed a circle of fiery red charm characters engraved on the surface of the stove. These characters constituted a circular magic pattern that was exuding a magic wave. I had especially asked one of the formula magicians of our sect to make this for me. It's called the all-positivity formula. It can enhance a flame's temperature to a great extent, Zhao Ping explained as he saw a surprised expression on Shi Mu's face. Shi Mu nodded. He felt that his chances of success might get higher with the help of this circular formula pattern. I had once thought of refining this meteoric iron blade into a magic weapon. I had almost planned the basic steps. But, I couldn't proceed with my plan because of its rising weight, and the unavailability of the golden lizard's poison. Brother Shi must have done a thorough research on the methods of refining a weapon. So, I'll keep asking for your directions. Zhao Ping took out a book from his shirt, and handed it over to Shi Mu with a smile. You flatter me, Brother Zhao. I can't give you any direction. I've only consulted a few books and ancient records. They've provided necessary information related to refining various kinds of magic weapons. So, it'll be me who would need your directions. Shi Mu's eyes revealed a hint of astonishment as he heard Zhao Ping's words. He received the book and replied with a smile. Then, he opened the book and glanced through it attentively. He continued to discuss the process of refining a weapon with Zhao Ping while he was at it. Shi Mu wasn't skilled in casting weapons. However, he commanded a better understanding of charm characters and formula magic than Zhao Ping. The two of them finally reached a decision after a long discussion. They divided the work among themselves. Oh, by the way, what kind of charm spell does Brother Shi wants to inscribe on the blade? Zhao Ping asked. Fierce inflammation charm magic, Shi Mu replied without any hesitation. Fierce inflammation charm magic. As far as I know, this charm spell consists of 12 characters. This is the most complicated low-grade charm spell, Zhao Ping was startled. That's right, Shi Mu replied with a smile. He had chosen this charm spell after going through a careful consideration. Shi Mu couldn't draw many charm spells. Moreover, the fierce inflammation charm spell was an extremely formidable spell. However, Shi Mu had drawn this charm spell several times before. So, he was familiar with its complexity. In addition, the meteoric iron black blade was excessively heavy. So, Shi Mu's striking power would be enormously enhanced if such a formidable charm spell was carved on his blade. Brother Shi seems extremely determined. So, I presume that he must be extremely confident about this. Let's begin right away. Zhao Ping nodded in agreement as he noticed a firm resolve on Shi Mu's face. Then, he started to adjust the flame of the stove. Shi Mu pulled out the black blade, and handed it over to Zhao Ping. Zhao Ping was responsible for the preliminary work. Shi Mu was responsible for the latter part of the process to carve the charm characters on the blade. The temperature of the room started to rise as the stove's flame increased under Zhao Ping's control. The flame's intensity finally reached the required degree. Then, Zhao Ping gripped the black blade with a 30 meters long fire tongs, and placed it on the stove. He then fished out 2 fiery red crystal stones from his bosom. They were 2 low-grade spirit stones of the fire element. He placed them in the 2 indentations on the stove. Bang! Suddenly, the charm characters in the circular pattern of the stove glittered brightly. They exuded a burst of bright red light as the fire in the stove flickered and became smaller. However, the flame became more refined. Moreover, the intensity of its heat increased by 2-fold. Zhao Ping's back had been soaked in sweat. Bean-sized sweat droplets were dripping down from his forehead and cheeks. But he didn't seem to pay any attention to it. His eyes were locked on the black blade inside the flame. His hands flipped over the blade in a continuous manner. The black blade's color became bright red inside the blazing flame within half an hour. Shi Mu wiped the sweat pouring down his face. His eyes brimmed with happiness. A common stove wouldn't have achieved such a result if the all-positivity formula hadn't been inscribed on it. Zhao Ping's complexion became dignified as he looked at the changing color of the black blade. Suddenly, he widened his eyes and grasped the fire tongs. Then, he removed the red-hot iron blade from the flame, and placed it on the forging platform. "The venom?" he asked in a low tone as he stretched out his hand. Shi Mu hastily handed over the bottle to him. Zhao Ping took the bottle. Then, he said something in a low voice. Suddenly, a faint layer of red light emerged on his body, especially on his palms. After that, an intense heat began to diffuse in the air. It formed a light fervent whirlwind which began to swirl around his body. A trace of strange look flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. Zhao Ping seemed to be practicing the cultivation art related to fire element. It was clear that he had reached a level that was far above Bai Shi's. Zhao Ping opened the lid of the bottle and inclined it. Thick drops of pale yellow liquid rolled down and fell on the black blade. He issued a muffled sound as a group of red light emerged on his palm. It then enveloped the blade like a flame. Chi! Chi! A crackling sound was heard. The yellow fluid changed its form under the Zhao Ping's control. It transformed into a thin layer of membrane similar to a yellow onion's skin. It gradually covered the entire surface of the black blade. All right. The surface of the blade has begun to soften under the effect of high temperature and venom. It'll become hard once its temperature declines. Brother Shi, hurry up. Record the charm spell fast. Suddenly, the red light under Zhao Ping's control dissipated. His face looked pale due to exhaustion. He stepped back and said. Shi Mu had been waiting for this moment. He quickly took out the red magic brush. This brush was special as its tip was unusually hard. Shi Mu used a different brush for drawing paper charms. This brush was especially made for drawing charm spell during the process of refining a magic weapon. He took a deep breath. Then, he placed his brush on the red-hot blade. His wrist began to move steadily like an expert. His eyes had transformed into a pair of pale golden eyes. Zhao Ping couldn't see Shi Mu's face as he stood behind him. Therefore, Shi Mu wasn't worried about being observed. However, Zhao Ping could clearly observe his proficiency through the swift movement of his wrist. Shi Mu breathed in a slow and gentle manner as he drew the charm spell. The charm characters gradually started to emerge on the surface of the blade. All the 12 charm characters had been finally inscribed on the blade. The fiery inflammation charm spell was complete now. All the characters glimmered with a faint red luminescence as Shi Mu finished the last stroke. They exuded a formidable magic wave of the fire element. It has turned out to be a success. Zhao Ping couldn't help but exclaim aloud. He was exhilarated. Surprisingly, Shi Mu didn't stop. His wrist continued to move skillfully. The red magic brush fell on the first character of the charm spell. And started to move again. Brother Shi, you, don't tell me that you wish to superimpose the charm spell. Zhao Ping was dumbfounded. He spoke in a whispering tone. However, Shi Mu didn't react. He seemed to be completely absorbed in his work. Zhao Ping sucked in a long breath. His eyes revealed a trace of disbelief as he looked towards Shi Mu's movement. Superimposing a charm spell at the time of refining a magic weapon could enhance might of that magic weapon. But, superimposing a charm spell was an extremely difficult task. The overlaying characters must be exactly the same, and should be overlaid at the same place. Even the tiniest mistake could destroy the spell and the weapon. It was extremely difficult to record even a single charm spell on a weapon. So, superimposing a charm spell was next to impossible. Only a few proficient charm magicians had ever dared to attempt this. After all, recording two identical charm spells was an awfully arduous task. Shi Mu's eyes were still emitting a pale yellow light. His wrist continued to move swiftly. The second charm spell got completed after a while. The red light sparkled again. Then, the charm spell on the surface of the blade lit up brighter than before. Zhao Ping exhaled a long sigh of relief. His quivering heart finally calmed down. He was about to say something, but then his complexion became dignified instead. Chapter 100, Completion of the Magic Weapon. Translator, Novel Saga Editor, Novel Saga. Shi Mu moved his wrist, and placed the magic brush on the surface of the black blade. Brother Shi, can it be that you intend to superimpose the charm spell once again? Zhao Ping asked in a muttering tone. He seemed to be stunned. Shi Mu was silent. However, his hand continued to move. Surprisingly, the speed of his drawing had become multiple times faster than before. The third charm spell was superimposed successfully after a while. However, Shi Mu didn't stop. Instead, he started to draw the fourth time. Meanwhile, the temperature of the black blade had started to decline. Its color had changed from fiery red to dark red. Therefore, Shi Mu's wrist didn't move as swiftly as it had before. The degree of hardness of the blade got enhanced with his last stroke. So, it became extremely difficult to draw the charm spell. The black blade was still on the casting platform. It had almost resumed its original state. Suddenly, the carved fiery inflammation charm spell emitted a burst of red light. Then, it slowly dissipated. This was the fifth time that the charm spell had been perfectly superimposed. Fortunately, the fifth attempt was completed before the hardness of the blade got restored. However, there was something else that needed to be done. A red line was drawn from the fiery inflammation charm spell to the hilt of the blade. Shi Mu took out a bottle and inclined it. He dropped a few drops of the lizard's poison at the extreme end of the red line. Chi! Chi! A burst of sound was heard. Suddenly, a small and shallow hole appeared on the surface of the blade. Shi Mu fished out a fire attribute spirit stone from his bosom, and embedded it in the small pit. Then, he turned his wrist, and outlined a few long lines around the fire element stone. Buzz! 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 The spirit stone started to exude a faint red light. The red light flowed along the red line and got submerged into the 12 magical characters of the fiery inflammation charm spell. It appeared as if blood was flowing through someone's vein. Bang! A layer of bright red flame emerged on the blade with a loud sound. But then, the flame dimmed and the charm spell regained its original shape. Shi Mu's face beamed with happiness. Finally, the superimposition of the charm spell was complete. The meteoric iron blade had finally transformed into a magic weapon. The fire attribute spirit stone was a source of spiritual energy. It could greatly enhance the might of the fiery inflammation charm spell. Shi Mu knew that he could barely activate the 5 overlaid spells with his present magic power. However, he could display a greater might with the support of an embedded spirit stone. A magic weapon couldn't exhibit a formidable might if it was used by a Hotian warrior. It was because of the inferior quality of the real qi possessed by Hotian warriors. They also lacked the strength to activate a charm spell on such a weapon. Therefore, they relied on embedded spirit stones to use a magic weapon. However, spirit stones were extremely expensive. Only the people with special status or strong financial background could afford them. Therefore, there were only a few warriors who could use a magic weapon. The remaining people had to wait till they had advanced to the Xian Tian realm, since the quality of their real qi would improve at that level. Then, they could use their magic power to activate the charm spell inscribed on the magic weapon by using the formula magic. Zhao Ping was astounded and alarmed. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Shi Mu had superimposed 5 layers of charm spell on the black blade at a stretch. His eyes were fixed at the raging flame on the black blade. He exhaled a long breath as he finally came back to his senses. Then, he spoke in a tone that dripped of a pleasant surprise. I had heard that Brother Shi is a prodigy in formula magic. But, I got to see it with my own eyes today. It was amazing. Brother Zhao is flattering me. Shi Mu turned around and replied with a smile. His eyes had returned to their normal state. As far as I know, many magician practitioners are especially assigned for refining weapons in our sect. But, only few lucky ones have been successful in superimposing a charm spell twice on a weapon. Even a lesser number of people have superimposed it thrice on a magic weapon. But, Brother Shi superimposed it 5 times at a stretch. Zhao Ping's words were tinged with admiration. He couldn't help but look at the black blade with shining eyes. The blade was in the process of cooling down. Shi Mu smiled faintly. His eyesight mutation was the key to his success. He wouldn't have achieved such an astonishing feat if it wasn't for his unique eyesight. In fact, he was confident that he could have overlaid the spell a few more times if he had more time. It was said that the power of a magic weapon was directly proportionate to the charm spell recorded on it. The Fierce Inflammation charm spell was a low-grade charm spell. So, its might was inferior to the might of a magic weapon infused with a high-ordered charm spell, even though it was superimposed 5 times on the blade. The meteoric iron blade was no longer a low-ordered magic weapon. It was far more formidable than any other low-ranked magic weapons. It was enough for a battle between Hotian warriors. The meteoric iron blade regained its normal temperature after a quarter of an hour. The 12 scarlet charm characters could be clearly seen on its surface. The pattern of the spell on the blade looked like blood, and it seemed to be flowing through the lines. Therefore, the blade was emitting a hint of menacing coldness. The trace of a satisfactory look flashed across Shi Mu's eyes. He grasped the blade's hilt, and placed it flat before his body. It's a high-quality magic weapon, that's rarely seen. The instantaneous explosive force of the 5 layers of fiery inflammation charm spell has been added to the bewildering weight of the blade. Brother Shi possesses an inexplicably formidable blade now. Zhao Ping shot an envious look towards the black blade as he spoke. The value of the black blade had been greatly increased since it had been transformed into a magic weapon. However, Zhao Ping was a candid person. He didn't harbor any negative thoughts even though he was a little envious. Brother Shi, do you want to try it out? Yes. Shi Mu raised his eyebrows as an idea came to his mind. So, he replied with a nod. This blade was his most satisfactory weapon so far. Moreover, he wanted to test the might of the charm spell that he had overlaid. Haha! Brother Shi, come with me. We have a practice field nearby. That place is especially made for our customers to try out their weapons, Zhao Ping chuckled. Then, he led Shi Mu out of the forging room, and into a broad and open area outside. Several wooden figurines were arranged in the open area. These figurines were wrapped in an iron sheet. There were also a few boulders, each of them was as big as a millstone. Several scratches of varying depths were visible on these boulders. These scratches had been left by the customers who had previously tested their swords and blades. Shi Mu looked around in an excited manner. Then, he issued a long and loud roar. He stamped his foot on the ground, and galloped to the practice field. He wielded his blade like wind as he exhibited a series of gestures and motions in the air. He had decided to try this blade out by using the 13 series of Gale Force blade art. The blade was quite heavy, it weighed 250 kilograms. However, Shi Mu wielded it as if it was as light as a feather. A whirlwind was set off as he waved it in all directions. The speed of his blade got faster with each move. Then, the blade transformed into a shadow and started to hover around his body. Shi Mu felt that his mind was clear. He swiftly swayed his blade in all directions as he followed the pattern of the 13 series of Gale Force blade art. Suddenly, he lifted his foot and stretched out one of his hands. He felt a stream of warmth well up in his heart. Then, the same feeling emerged in his mind, and started to flow through his limbs and bones. Ha! Suddenly, Shi Mu issued a loud shout, and thrust his blade forward. The blade shadow trembled and transformed into 13 black and misty shadows. These fierce and cold blade shadows surged forward and rolled in all directions. Zhao Ping was startled as he saw this. He couldn't help but move a few steps backwards. 13 cuts in one breath. Shi Mu's heart brimmed with exhilaration. His Gale Force blade art had made a terrific breakthrough. It had reached the consummate stage. He had finally achieved 13 cuts in one breath. He had managed to do it once with the help of the body-lifting charm. But, now he had reached the consummate stage by himself. Clang! 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 The 13 shadows rushed out of his blade, and hit a huge blue boulder. The boulder crumbled into several fragments with a muffled sound, and got scattered. A whistling sound was heard. One of the pieces of that boulder had flown towards Shi Mu's face. A sparkling light streaked across Shi Mu's eyes. His magic power surged up inside his body, and poured itself into the black blade. Suddenly, the fiery inflammation charm spell on the surface of the blade lit up. It exuded a layer of red light, and shrouded the entire blade. Shi Mu let out a low shout and wielded his blade. Suddenly, the black blade changed into a red shadow. Then, it pounded heavily on the huge rock, and split it into pieces. A loud sound was heard. The millstone-sized rock exploded into pieces. Its broken fragments got scattered. Shi Mu jumped back a few steps to avoid the scattering debris. Then, he held his blade and stood still. Good. Brother Shi, this blade art is exquisite. The might of the fiery inflammation spell is truly amazing. But I guess Brother Shi hasn't used his entire strength. Zhao Ping applauded him with a smile on his face. He then walked up to him. Shi Mu nodded. It was natural that he wouldn't use his entire strength to test the magic blade. He had only triggered a single layer of the 5 overlaid spells. Right. It's indeed an amazing blade. Suddenly, a hoarse voice was heard from outside the practice field.